Well, hello and welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the NSF Virtual Grants Conference. Before we begin, we'd like to take a poll to find out a little bit more about you. If you're using Zoom from a desktop browser, you may not be able to see the poll, and we would advise you to use the Zoom application. We have arranged for the entire grants conference to take place this year online, covering about 2 weeks worth of webinars for the research community. All of these sessions have been pre-recorded. However, we will be taking live Q&A. And for information about the sessions and our speakers, we ask that you visit the conference website. The content for this webinar series is similar as what it would be for an in-person conference. If you have questions, however, we ask that you submit them using the Q&A function in Zoom. Please submit them as you think of them. Some questions we will respond to quickly, while others we will hold for our live Q&A session immediately following the presentation. We are encouraging attendees to upvote questions, and you can do this by navigating to the Q&A function and click on the thumbs up button. And this will bring the most popular questions to the top of the Q&A. At the end of the presentation, we're going to spend about 15 minutes answering your questions. Please keep in mind that we do have a very large audience for this session, so we may not be able to answer all of your questions. This session is being recorded, and it will be made available on our website, nsfpolicyoutreach.com, in the coming weeks. And we'll certainly send you an email announcement once these sessions are posted and you can share them with your coworkers and colleagues. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, just put that into the Q&A and somebody will assist you. So I want to thank you for participating in our poll. We're happy and excited that you can join us, as this marks our first ever virtual NSF Grants Conference. And we've been doing these for a long time, since 1993, where they started as small single-day events with a handful of staff, and they've grown over the years. They became 2-day events with 25 to 30 NSF staff, and now we have a virtual event. We hope that you will enjoy this conference and all the sessions that you have selected to attend. I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover the proposal preparation process at NSF. This session will be covered by Gene Feldman of the Policy Office, Stefan Robila from the Directorate for Computer and Information Science and Engineering, and Jennifer Wade from the Directorate for Geosciences.
Well, welcome everyone to the Fall 2020 Virtual Grants Conference Proposal Preparation Session. I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues to present to you the proposal preparation session. My name is Gene Feldman. I'm head of the Policy Office in the Division of Institution and Award Support in the Office of Budget Finance and Award Management. I am joined by 2 esteemed colleagues from our research directorates, Stefan Robila. He's a program director in the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure in the Directorate for Computer and Information Science and Engineering, as well as Jennifer Wade. Jennifer is the acting section head in the Division of Earth Sciences in the Directorate for Geosciences. We have a wealth of information to provide to all of you as part of this session. And what we intend to cover is finding funding opportunities, a bit about the NSF Proposal on Award Policies and Procedures Guide, which is the backbone of our proposal and award process, the types of proposal submissions that you can submit to NSF, the sections of an NSF proposal, postdoc mentoring plans, and data management plans. We hope that this will be an interactive session when we actually go through and present this material to you. And at this point, I would like to turn it over to the next set of slides.
All right, so first let's talk about how to find funding opportunities. So you do some research, and where does your research fit within NSF? And there are a couple of ways to do that. First, if you go to the NSF website, you can search by research area. And you can also search here by funding. Under the funding menu, you can find all kinds of things about policies and procedures, how a merit review works. You can find the proposal guide, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and also specific funding opportunities for where you might be in career stage, graduate students, K-12 education, all of that. You can also find funding opportunities if you scroll further down the webpage, and there's a little search box where you can search by keyword or just view by program area. So for instance, I'm in geosciences. I can look at everything that's available within geo. Another way, if you're still kind of not sure where you might fit, is to look at what's been funded before. So if you go to the awards tab on the NSF website, you'll come to this box where you can search for a keyword. So say you work on Mount Rainier. You can search here, see who else has worked in that area and what we've funded in that area. You can search by discipline type, you can search by PI name, all kinds of things are possible here. And then this will help you narrow down what programs have funded the kind of work you do in the past. Of course, you can also find funding opportunities beyond NSF if you go to grants.gov and use the search feature there. So here, you can do the same kind of search, but you might find opportunities at other agencies, not just the NSF. So let's talk about the Proposal and Award Procedures, Policies and Procedures Guide, which we call the PAPG. So this is the sort of the main guiding document for anyone who's submitting to NSF or has an award from NSF. And it serves both, it's for you, the community, and it's also for us as NSF staff. So part one is that proposal preparation and submission guideline piece, and part two has all the guidelines for award administration. So the PAPG, it provides guidance for preparation and submission. It tells you about what the merit review criteria are. So what are the criteria by which your proposal is going to be reviewed? And within that, it might tell you the reasons why a proposal might not be accepted or it might get returned without review. And it tells you the process for withdrawing a proposal, what happens when a proposal is declined. And it really gives all the policies to help you manage and monitor the award administration of your grant or your cooperative agreement for both PIs and university administrators. So there are a bunch of different kinds of funding opportunities that you might be submitting a proposal to. So program descriptions and program announcements, the only guidance you really need to know are what's in that announcement and then what's in the PAPG. Follow those instructions. A program solicitation is a little bit different. So you have to follow the guidance of the PAPG, but the solicitation may also have extra pieces of guidance or extra documents that you need to include. It might include specific information about eligibility, either for you or your institution. So you want to make sure if you're submitting to a solicitation that you understand not just the PAPG, but also the guidance within that solicitation. And then there are these things called Dear Colleague letters, which are sort of notifications of special opportunities, which might also have special conditions for how to submit and who can submit. So overall, when you're looking at a program announcement or a solicitation, you want to make sure that you fit the goal of the program. So is your work within the purview of this program? Are you eligible as an individual? Is your institution eligible? And then what are the special requirements that might exist there? And I'll pass it off to Stefan.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. So next, let's talk a little bit about the information that is available to you as you are looking at a specific solicitation. And the slide that you have in front of you presents an example of a standard solicitation. It's the NSF includes, and you have, we are famous for our acronyms. But in addition to that, I would point to you the program solicitation number. And the number is important because it allows us within NSF to quickly identify the specific funding opportunity, and also allows us to guide the discussion. It also allows us to keep track of the proposals and so on. The other thing that is important when you are looking at the sample cover page of a solicitation is to look at which offices, divisions, or directorates provide support through funding for this opportunity. So in this case, you see pretty much every directorate within the NSF participates in NSF includes, but in other cases, you may see fewer directorates, and in some cases, you may see specific divisions within the directorates participating. So not all organizations may be participating. The other important aspect of solicitation is the total funding amount and the number of awards that are expected to be made under the solicitation. So every solicitation would include this section under the heading award information. And the first part would include an estimated number of awards. In this case, it's 1 to 3. And in addition to that, anticipated funding amount, in this case, $8.5 million for up to 1 to 3 awards. Many solicitation may have slightly different language. They may provide a breakdown in the different type of projects. So, for example, I'm a part of a program called Cyber Infrastructure for Sustained Scientific Innovation, or CSSI. And in that solicitation, we have different types of projects, small projects and large projects. So in that case, the number of awards may be broken down into type of projects, and even the funding may be broken down under the different types of projects. This is, I have just mentioned that I'm part of a solicitation. This is extremely important for the one that I mentioned, but it is also, again, a section that you will see in every cover page for the solicitation, and that relates to the eligibility information. And here, eligibility deals with multiple aspects. It deals with the type of organizations that can submit proposals. It deals with the type of individuals who can serve as PIs for the proposals. And in some cases, it may deal with the number of proposals that somebody can be part of. So you have here examples that are specific to the include solicitation. An important aspect that we get asked a lot by the PIs is when could they submit proposals, and this relates to the deadlines. And I like this slide because the first thing that we tell you is that we have many programs that have no deadlines, meaning that proposals may be submitted at any time throughout the years. But there are other programs. We continue to have programs with diverse types of deadlines and target dates. And for the next couple of slides, I will talk about the target dates and the deadline dates. So with respect to the target dates, if you're looking at PABG, you will see that the definition for target date is a date after which proposals continue to be accepted, although a delay may be encountered, or you may miss a particular panel or a committee meeting. Compared to that, a deadline is very clear. It is a date and a time, usually 5 p.m. submitters local time, and after which proposals will not be accepted. And if you manage to submit it, then it will be returned without review. The deadline date will be waived only in extenuating circumstances. And if you are interested in what extenuating circumstances means, deviation may be authorized in accordance to a specific chapter, Chapter 2A in PABG. Submission window. A submission window basically also gives you a start from the, a date from which proposals are accepted for a specific solicitation. So apart from CSSI, I am also part of the Computer Information Science and Engineering, or SCIENCE, core research program. And if you are looking at that specific solicitation, you will see that apart from the different types of projects that we accept, we also have different types of submission windows. So for example, for the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure Core Research Program that I'm directly part of, the submission window is 2 weeks. It starts 2 weeks before the deadline. But once the submission window time passes, then the target date or the deadline becomes really nothing else but the time by which you can submit proposals. So in addition to the date, in addition to who can submit proposals, there are other things that you may want to be aware before you submit a proposal. And in some specific solicitations, we request that a letter of intent be submitted before the proposal. And again, if you are referring to PABG, you will see the purpose of the letter of intent. It's not to review your idea before the full proposal, but to allow us within NSF to prepare for the full proposal, for the submission, in terms of identifying reviewers, in terms of identifying specific areas. And again, the point is not here to review something small and discourage you from submitting, but to prepare us better. However, I will caution you that if a letter of intent is required and you do not submit the letter of intent, you will not be allowed to submit the full proposal. Compared to that, in some solicitations, however, we have preliminary proposals, and again, they are sometimes required, sometimes they are optional. And the purpose for requesting a preliminary proposal first is to reduce the proposal's burden. So usually pre-proposals are smaller, and I will refer again to programs within size. We have the Expeditions program. This is one of the largest programs in terms of the funding and duration for size. And here we ask the teams to consider a pre-proposal. In fact, we require a pre-proposal that is much smaller, that provides less constraints and allows size and allows us to understand the specific topic and the nature of the project, and at the same time avoids allows the PIs to spend less time on preparing it in case their idea is really totally off. So again, there's reduction of the burden on the proposer. It increases the overall quality of the full submission because in the case of the Expeditions, we review the proposals with the pre-proposals with external reviewers, and we provide feedback to the PI. So if a proposal is invited, if a pre-proposal is invited for a full proposal, not only that they receive a note saying you are invited, but they also receive constructive feedback on how to improve the proposal. If a pre-proposal is not invited, they also receive full reviews to the pre-proposals. And finally, there is also the internal reason assisting the NSF program staff to manage the review process and the selection of the reviewer. So that remains the same. So I will mention that again, depending on the solicitation, this may be required or optional. If it is required, again, you must submit it before you can submit a full proposal. Next slide, and I think my part is done.
Okay, so next let's talk about some of the parts of a proposal that will come in. So some proposal documents are really for NSF staff only. They're not going to be provided to reviewers. And these might be letters of authorization that let you deviate from proposal requirements, list of suggested reviewers or reviewers not to include, proprietary or privileged information. Some proposals require patent info or other things that you may not want shared widely, various proposal certifications, and information about collaborators and other affiliations that, again, don't get shared but are for NSF staff to use to move the merit review process forward. So let's talk about the required sections of a proposal that comes in. We're going to step through each of these items from the cover sheet at the top of the proposal through all of these sections. And each of these is important because if you don't include these required sections in your proposal, it's not going to be accepted by research.gov or Fastlane and will just be returned to you and you won't be allowed to submit. So the cover sheet is the first thing that we see in a proposal. A lot of these boxes are filled in electronically once you log in to start the proposal building process. But this tells us, what are you submitting to? Are you submitting to the PAPG or to a solicitation? What's the program? What's the date you're submitting? Who are you? What institution are you at? How much money are you asking for? All of these kind of basic pieces of information. And then your proposal is going to get assigned a number that will live up in that upper right corner. Next comes the project summary. So this is a one-page document, and there are boxes for a summary of the intellectual merit, summary of the broader impacts, and an overview. And it's important that you have each of these pieces filled in. If your project summary has some special characters, this happens a lot in math or engineering, then you need to upload this as a separate PDF document. Okay, and then comes the project description. And this is the bulk of the proposal, right? So for the majority probably of proposals that come in, this is the 15-page description of what you want to do, why you want to do it, how you're going to do it, how you'll know if you're successful, and then what benefits to science and society will come if your project is successful. And it's important that within this, on your project summary, you had your one paragraph of broader impacts. There needs to be a separate section within your project description narrative that also describes the broader impacts. And I can tell you from experience, that section within your proposal should not just be a copy paste of that broader impacts paragraph that's in your project summary. This is where you should expand on the details, talk about your mentoring plans, your outreach plans, whatever your broader impacts are. This is where you go into detail because remember, the merit review process evaluates both the intellectual merit and the broader impacts. So the project description is your place to really lay out what you want to do. Of course, you need a references cited section. This is required. And they'll look different depending on which field you're in, right? The references cited should follow whatever the accepted scholarly practices are within your discipline. So references cited in engineering may look pretty different from one in biology, but it should be correct for whatever field you're in. And then the biographical sketches are the next section of a proposal. And these are required just for the senior project personnel. They should not be more than 2 pages in length per person. And you need to follow an NSF approved format for all of these. That's really important and has been updated this year. And I'll pass it off.
Okay, I'd like to make one more quick comment about the biographical sketch component of an NSF proposal before we move on. Every section of an NSF proposal, when you look at our merit review criterion, has what we're asking each reviewer to consider about particular aspects of a proposal. And for the biographical sketches, it's really how well qualified is the individual or team to carry out the research as proposed. That's what we're asking a reviewer to look at. And so we get questions from senior personnel who say, well, tell me what would be the right things to put in there. There are sections on the appointments and on products and on synergistic activities. And our response to you is you should be putting in the biographical sketch. Obviously, there are required pieces, like your all of your appointments. But this is really when you're getting to your products or your synergistic activities, you really should be identifying those aspects that you believe makes the best case for why you are qualified to do this particular project. So we get lots of questions daily into policy@nsf.gov. And so I just wanted to emphasize that particular point, that focus on those things in the synergistic activities and the product section that makes the best case that you could carry out this research. Now we're going to move on to the budget section of a proposal. And I'm actually covering a few sections together. The budget section, facilities, equipment, and other resources, and current and pending support. The budget section and the facilities, equipment, and other resources section together helps answer the question of whether there is sufficient resources to carry out the project as proposed. And so what you see on this slide is the actual NSF budget format that we are asking you to use to identify what it is that you're asking for funding for NSF for. What are all of these particular items? You must use this format, and each proposal has to have a budget for each year that you are requesting funding. And it should be no more. You get a budget justification to go along with this, and you get up to 5 pages for your institution to justify all of the items that you've requested funding for. And I will tell you right up front that the mistake that many folks make is not spending the time justifying. They feel like, well, they should understand what I want to use these funds for. No, if you're asking for funding from NSF, you should be justifying, telling that reviewer, because remember, these are program officers and reviewers who ultimately will look at this and they're going to say, okay, if I were doing that research, are these the kind of items that I would like to include, or I would include in that proposal as well? If you have any subawards identified for this particular proposal, they also can include a separate budget justification of no more than 5 pages for each of the subawards. So now we're going to talk about the budgetary guidelines and a little bit more information about level setting, context setting. So when you go in there, the PAP guide has a lot of information about each of the budget categories, what our expectations are, when you would be using that budget category. But the things that really after doing 50 of these grants conferences that I would like to emphasize is that people ask all the time of program officers, how much should I include? What should I include? You should be including what you need, what you would need to carry out this research. So the costs should be realistic. They should be reasonable for what it is you're trying to achieve in this particular proposal. Again, I've identified the importance of the justification and establishing why you need that, why you need those particular funds for that proposal. We've also talked about the program solicitation, and a program solicitation may modify the guidance in the PAP guide, and in particular, it may tell you, for example, the types of costs that would be most appropriate for a proposal coming in for that solicitation. So if you are submitting to a solicitation, make sure you look at that particular section of the solicitation to ensure that it does not have specific guidance, if you will, for what types of costs would be appropriate. So in the PAP guide, we also go through what those eligible costs are. Personnel. NSF does have a slightly different compensation policy than other federal agencies, so it's important that you understand, and the PAP guide goes through this, that NSF's general policy is that we limit the salary compensation for any individual identified as senior personnel to no more than 2 months of their regular salary in any 1 year across all NSF funded grants. So we will fund up to 2 months. The reality is we sometimes fund less. And it's also important for folks to realize that you can ask for more. If you ask for more, you would have then that 2 months across all your NSF funded grants, you would need to justify in a very serious way why you need that extra compensation beyond those 2 months. And if the program officer allows that and includes it in the approved budget, then you have the approval that you need for NSF. There are different rules associated with after an award is made. You can re-budget any of the costs in this personnel category, but it cannot constitute a change in objective or scope. We also allow equipment, and some of that may be obviously dictated by the kind of research that you end up doing. Travel, participant support. Now, that is one category that is probably worth emphasizing the importance of, because it is not something that folks necessarily understand. So the participant support budget category refers to direct costs for items such as stipend or subsistence allowance, travel, registration fees, paid to or on behalf of participants or trainees in connection with NSF-sponsored conferences or training projects. So that is what we mean by participant support costs. So I would strongly encourage you to, if you plan on including that category in your budget, you may want to talk to your Office of Sponsored Projects to make sure that you have correctly understood what that particular budget category is to be used for, and the types of costs that you have requested compensation. We obviously also allow other direct costs, and we identify some of the categories here that are actually included that would be appropriate other direct costs depending on the nature of what you plan to do. NSF's cost sharing policy. Well, I don't want to overemphasize this. NSF has a cost sharing policy which prohibits the inclusion of voluntary committed cost sharing in solicited or unsolicited proposals. And that The only exceptions are whether the foundation actually includes it as a requirement in the actual solicitation. And there are only a whopping 6 programs across NSF that require mandatory cost sharing. And so obviously you would want to look at the solicitation to see if your program is one of those 6. What I would like to emphasize, though, and that's what's most important on this slide, is the last bullet. Organizations may, at their own discretion, contribute any amount of voluntary uncommitted cost sharing to NSF-sponsored projects. And what that means is that if your institution, for example, an easy example that we often give is a particular faculty member is not requesting salary. And so the individual would not put any amount of funding on the budget, but they would tell us what they were doing with their time and facilities, equipment, and other resources that I'm about to talk about next. That is, when you put that there, that is not a violation of NSF's cost sharing policy. To be voluntary committed cost sharing, it must be on the budget. So just remember that is one way to indicate whether it is something that is voluntary committed or voluntary uncommitted. And for voluntary uncommitted, you can put that in your proposal without having it be held against you. So now I'm going to talk about facilities, equipment, and other resources. And it's important to understand what I just mentioned, that this section plus equipment plus the budget section are all of the resources, whether you have them available from your institution or one of your subaward institutions, or you're requesting it on the budget. That is what a reviewer is looking at to say, do they have all the resources necessary to carry out the research as proposed? And so this section assesses the adequacy of the organizational resources. And that is whether it is personnel, whether it's equipment, whether it's facilities, everything of that nature that you are dedicating to a project. It also could be one of your collaborators that is providing or donating to that project. Again, that is something that would help a reviewer assess whether you have everything you need to carry out the research as proposed. Now I'd like to go into current and pending support. Now, current and pending support is very, very important section of the proposal. Many of you have heard or read in the newspapers all of the concerns on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, as well as written in articles about the whole area of research protection. So I would like to make you understand what exactly NSF uses this particular section of the proposal for. This section of the proposal is really used to assess the capacity of the individual or team to carry out the project based on all of the current and pending support that they have available. It also can be used to help assess any duplication or overlap. So what you are putting in this particular section of the proposal is all of the information on current and pending support for ongoing projects and proposals. It includes in-kind support as well. And NSF has put a lot of emphasis on developing FAQs for what types of information that has to be included in this session, in this particular section. I would like to also emphasize that it is not just all of the support that you have that goes through your institution. If, for example, you also individually receive support and it does not go through your institution, we would expect that you would identify that information on current and pending support as well. One of the changes that we just made in the last PAP guide and went into effect on October 5th is that you must use an NSF approved format to submit this information to NSF. And currently, NSF has a page available that we link to in this section of the PAP guide that identifies what are the NSF approved formats. And at the present time, the NSF approved formats for current and pending support are Science CV, which is through our colleagues at the National Library of Medicine. They have an NSF biosketch in Science CV that you go and you fill out the information for. We also have an NSF fillable format. Both of those meet the requirement to use an NSF approved format. I should warn you that if you try to submit a proposal and have your current and pending support in other than an NSF approved format, you will not be able to submit the proposal. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jean. And I would point to you that the current and pending support is important for us as program directors to understand also how the project that you are currently proposing connects to the other things. And as you mentioned, it's important for us to make an informed decision whether what you are suggesting is in fact overlapped and have already been supported by other things. And I would also mention that we are talking about proposal preparation, but the current pending support continues to be important even after an award is made, because it allows us to understand how the project evolves and what your commitments are with respect to the other projects. But let's stick with the proposal for this session. And the next part that I wanted to talk about is related to the special information and supplementary documentation. And this section is used for the required data management plan, for the postdoctoral mentoring plan, and other pertinent supplementary information such as letters of collaboration. The PAPG Chapter 2 has a very clear description of each of these things. And I would mention that I think that every solicitation would refer to PAPG, for example, for the data management plan or for the postdoctoral mentoring plan. And also many of them would refer directly for the letters of collaboration. However, in addition to these specific supplementary documents that you would see in almost every proposal, some solicitations may include additional requirements. So in addition to PAPG, it's very important to look at the specific solicitation to understand what other documents are expected when you submit. So letter of collaboration is an important aspect, because we are trying to ensure that when you propose activities that involve collaborators, those collaborators are aware of those activities and also that they have committed to be part of it. And the letter should consist of a single sentence statement of collaboration, and it's taken from the PAPG on this slide. If the proposal submitted and with the title is selected for funding by NSF, it is my intent to collaborate and to commit resources as detailed in the project description or the facilities, equipment, and other resources section of the proposal. So what it stated basically is that whoever signs the letter is committing to do what the rest of the proposal describes that person is committed to do. I'm managing a solicitation that has a deadline in a few days from today, the date of the recording, and one of the common emails that I get right now is, can additional things be included in the letter of collaboration? And for this particular solicitation that refers directly to the PAPG language, my answer is very simply no. And then the follow-up question from the PI is usually, but how do we explain what that collaborator is doing? And I'm not trying to be very direct, but I'm referring them exactly to the sentence that I just read. You should have described this in the project description, or you should have described this in the facilities, equipment, or other resources. So if they provide resources, they should be in the facilities. If they provide specific activities, or if they contribute to specific activities, they should be in the project description. So why are we so strict in many of these solicitations? The reason is because we are trying to avoid these letters becoming endorsement letters. That's one thing, right? So the other reason is because we are trying to prevent some PIs from circumventing the limitations in terms of the length of description of proposals. So we do not want these letters to become extensions of the proposal themselves. So what type of collaboration? You have some of the descriptions in the rest of the slide in terms of intellectual contributions to the project, permission to access a site or use of an instrument or facility, offer to furnish samples, materials for research, logistical support, evaluation services, mentoring of US students at foreign site or anywhere else. Every proposal that includes in the budget support for postdoctoral researchers must include a description of the mentoring activities that will be provided for such individuals. And again, this is a common query that I have been receiving lately in terms of what does it mean includes on the budget. And if you are looking at the budget description and looking at the budget structure, you will see there is a specific line in the budget. I think it is B1, if I remember correctly, that is the budget line in which funding support for postdoctoral scholars.
That's correct, Stefan.
Thank you, Jean. Because one of the questions that I have received is that, for example, in some cases, a postdoctoral scholar with the support from the institution may submit the proposal themselves. And in that case, a postdoctoral mentoring plan would not be required. Right. So I wanted to be very clear when it is required to submit a postdoctoral mentoring plan. But I also wanted to be very clear that a mentoring plan is really what it says. It has to be a mentoring plan. It has to be a description of the activities that the senior personnel, the PI, co-PI, and the senior researchers will provide in support of the postdoctoral scholars as they enhance their standing within the community, as they continue to enhance their ability to be active members of the scientific community. Right. So again, the proposals that identify a postdoc and do not include this mentoring plan will be prevented. So this is not that they will be returned, but you will not be able to submit the proposal through the submission mechanism. If this is a collaborative submission, multiple institutions that submit submit proposals for a single project, then a single mentoring plan would be expected for the entire collaborative project. So what type of activities are we talking about? From my graduate school and from my early career, I remember some of these, and they relate to career counseling, and we do that even with undergraduate researchers, not with postdoctoral scholars, but we go all the way to the postdoctoral researchers. Training in preparation for grant proposals. This activity is a training activity, right? So suggesting to your postdoctoral scholars to view some of these sessions would probably be valuable. Training in responsible professional practices, developing publications and presentations, guidance or techniques to improve teaching and mentoring skills, counseling on how to effectively collaborate with researchers from diverse backgrounds and disciplinary areas. All these activities are valuable for professional development in the context of postdoctoral scholar context. Data management plans. Again, this is one supplementary document that you'll see in every proposal. It is described in the PABG, and every proposal is required to include a supplementary doc, a data management plan. The length is up to 2 pages. The plan should describe how the proposal will conform to the NSF policy on dissemination and sharing of research results. A valid plan may include only the statement that no detail is needed. And there are some solicitations in which, let's say if it's an instrumentation request, then such as the major research instrumentation or the MRI, in fact, the solicitation notes that if no specific data is generated just by the instrument and is generated through the projects that are enabled by the instrument, then the management of data for those projects will be left with those projects and not included in the MRI data management plan. So again, that may be acceptable, but you have to explain why you believe that nothing will be generated and nothing needs to be managed. The plan will be reviewed as part of the intellectual merit and the broader impacts of the proposal. And I have to say, I'm a computer scientist, and data in my context, in my area, may be different than what data means in Jennifer's areas and across directorates. So because of that, you will see, if you're going to the website, to the web address that you see on top of this slide, www.nsf.gov/BFA/DIAS/policy/dmp.gsp, you'll see that every directorate has separate guidance or slightly different guidance for the data management plan. And even within some directorates, some divisions may have their own different guidance for the data management plans. And this is very important to look at it. So if you remember earlier, I pointed to the solicitation information in which I said which divisions or directorates participate in a specific solicitation with funding, that is a place in which you would go back to that information and understand what type of data management plan you need to submit. So I point to you because, again, in SAIS, if you are reading the specific description for data management plan for my directorate, you'll discover that we consider software and scripts to be part of data, to be also be data and artifacts. So describing how do you manage and how do you share and how do you store software and is in fact a requirement as part of data management plans in SAIS. And I'm not that knowledgeable with respect to the other plans for the other directorates. I would assume you might find it in other places also. So I believe this is the last slide of the presentation, and I really like this motto, ask early, ask often. It is extremely important to ask questions as soon as possible, and we will use the time to answer them throughout the live session. I will point you to the additional resources, the nsf.gov staff, in case you're wondering how to find somebody that works for or with NSF. nsf.gov staff organizational list gives you a structured view of the National Science Foundation. And then, of course, something that I did not mention is that I am not a permanent staff at NSF. I'm a rotator, meaning that I'm a faculty at a university in the United States that has joined the National Science Foundation for a limited duration of time. So if you're wondering how you can do that also, you have the last link, nsf.gov, about career ops, rotators, index JSP, with a description of what it means and how you can find opportunities as rotator. And of course, there are also opportunities for permanent and federal employees. So thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you. We've received a lot of questions from all of you, and I know a number of us we've been furiously typing in responses on some of them, and some of them we're going to answer live. But before we get to your questions, I know that Jean Feldman had an update that she wanted to provide to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I will try to make this very brief because I know we want to get to the questions, but it is very important that all of you recognize that we issued a DCL, a Dear Colleague letter, on November 13th that had to do with career life balance supplemental funding requests. And instituted in 2012, we did a career life balance initiative it's an agency-wide approach to help attract, retain, and advance graduate students, postdoctoral researchers, and other researchers in STEM fields. And with this DCL, we wanted to draw you to the opportunity for supplemental funding, particularly in this COVID environment, to help researchers who are confronted with short-term dependent care responsibilities, and to help ensure that the research activities supported by an NSF grant can continue. The number of the DCL is NSF 21-021, and we strongly, if you encounter such a situation, your colleague encounters such a situation, you take a look at that DCL. Again, during these unprecedented times, we know that some may need this kind of assistance. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jean. And again, we did get a lot of questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them in the minutes that we have with you, but we are going to put in the chat some links to existing FAQs that are out there for proposal and award policy, and also some that deal with the biographical sketch and current and pending support sections. So we do have FAQs on that, and we're going to share those with you. But let me start off by, we have a question asking us about collaborative proposals and when a proposer should consider submitting a single proposal with subawards versus a separately submitted collaborative with multiple organizations submitting on for a single unified project. So I'll throw that out there to the panel for whoever wants to start.
I'll pick it up. Jeremy, thank you very much. I will say that in some cases, you may want to look at the solicitation to understand if there are restrictions and there are specific there is specific guidance with respect to how to submit the proposal. I think I have answered through the Q&A at least a question that was sending the link to the PAPPG to our document that we keep referring to that defines what a collaborative proposal is. But it is really at the end, if there are no restrictions, it is really up to you and the team and your organization. A single proposal that is defined as collaborative with sub-awards means that the submitting institution bears the full responsibility of all the funding received from NSF and then is responsible in how to manage the sub-award relationship. A and from the point of view of the NSF, the single institution is responsible and single award is made, and the reporting requirements have to be met by the institution that receives the award. A collaborative proposal would be submitted as a group by multiple institutions, and multiple awards will be made, each portion to a separate institution. Each institution that receives a separate award would be responsible of managing the funds and also will be responsible for the reporting and then the communication with the program director. So it is really up to you. There are, to my knowledge, some details related to the indirect cost that some institutions consider, but that's not something that, as a program director, concerns me. What concerns me later on, once you receive the award, is to remember that you submitted this as a group and you are responsible and you carry this project as a group, as a collaborative. And because I think that every week I get at least one question from a collaborative PI that tells me that the lead PI of the collaborative is responsible for something, to which I dutifully respond that as a group you receive the award, as a group you report, and then you detail specific things. So you have to remember that even if you got a separate award, you still have to be part of that collaboration.
I would just add, Stefan, that as a program director, I do pay attention if there's a difference for subawards and collaboratives, because a subaward will often incur double overhead. And so sometimes it takes more of a program budget sometimes to support them. But I agree with everything else that you said for sure.
But that's not a policy of it. I mean, NSF policy is, unless the solicitation specifies, and we do, very large facilities and centers are almost always a single award. But the preference is up to the institution otherwise, or the group of institutions, to determine what's best for that particular research.
Okay, the next question is, can you provide guidance on likely ceilings or ranges for budgets for a particular program? New faculty often get anecdotal advice on likely budget ranges, but sometimes that information is conflicting. Should, for example, should they contact the program officer to discuss these things? What's the best course of action in this case?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. Every solicitation should have, somewhere down in the bottom, it should have an estimate of what the program budget is and an estimate of the number of awards expected to be made. So you can sort of do some math to get a rough ballpark. You can look up what's been funded before to get a range as well, although there's some tricks to why that's not the easiest way. But definitely contact the program director and ask them, what they think is reasonable within their program. But the first step, just to get a ballpark, is definitely just divide that expected budget by number of awards.
Okay.
I agree. Yeah. I would say that in some programs there might be specific guidance. So I remember in REU programs, for example, in SAIS, a PI could contact the Cognizant program officers and they would get some very specific guidance on how to shape the budget.
Okay. A lot of programs at NSF are moving to having no deadlines. And so if you have that case, what's the ideal start date for a project that you can recommend? Should we be looking 6 months prior to the proposed start date?
I have a lot of thoughts on this one too. So my program doesn't have deadlines. So I have some experience with this. I tell PIs that you should think about when do you want your money to arrive, and then count that 6 months back, and that's when you should probably submit. It's going to take probably 6 months to review a proposal, right? To get it through ad hoc review and panel, or some combination thereof, depending on what program you're submitting to. And then, of course, it could be shorter, it could be longer. Right now, we don't have a budget past December 11th, so a lot of things are going to be delayed, right? So again, always ask your program director what they think is best. But in my program, that's what I usually tell people. There's no limit on within reason, how far out it goes. If you're submitting now, but you don't want to start until next summer, that's fine. Just know that the review process is going to take months.
So it's going to take 6 months plus 30 days for the division if you're fortunate to receive that award. But what amount of time you plan for, the reality is that, that's for planning purposes only. Unfortunately, as Jennifer said, it could take shorter or longer depending on the review process at NSF.
Okay, we have a question about the project summary requirements, and the policy says that you have to have separate statements for intellectual merit and broader impacts. They're asking if these need to be labeled separately because the questioner put them into a single paragraph but had the proposal returned.
Yes, actually, there need to be separate statements for an overview, intellectual merit, and broader impacts. And you're filling it in, certainly in Fastlane. That's the way you do it. And if the box isn't filled in, it won't let you submit. So yes, that is an NSF requirement.
Okay, we have a question here. How do you deal with industry or K through 12 educational key personnel who do not have publications? The biosketch is required for key personnel, but the template does not fit their contributions, which are rarely publication-based.
I will start with that. I'd like my colleagues to join in afterwards. NSF actually changed this section of the biosketch for just this reason. It used to be publications. You did 5 publications most closely related to the project and 5 others. We changed it to products because we do recognize that different communities have different things that they may want to emphasize. Again, going back to demonstrating their qualifications to carry out the research. Things like data sets. There's a whole variety of other things that would be appropriate in your community that you could use to demonstrate your qualifications. It doesn't have to be a publication. It could be any form of product. As long as someone can go out on the web and look at it, if a reviewer wants to, you're demonstrating your case to carry out the research.
Okay. I'm going to combine 2 questions here, and this is with regard to reviewers. Well, the first question is, are panel dates published somewhere so that a PI can try to meet if they're dealing with a call that has a target date? The other question is, related question, I guess, is how does one become a reviewer?
So how to become a reviewer is the easiest one. So you should send your CV to the program that most closely relates to what you do and say, hey, I would love to be a reviewer. And we will gladly take that CV and train you in the process. I also saw a question about, do you have to have NSF support to review? No, you do not. I love having new people. I love having postdocs come. It's a great way to learn about the merit review process by starting to review proposals. Are panel dates published? No, it is not public information when panels are being held.
So that being said, with respect to reviewers, please understand that as I'm counting close to 1,000 attendees, it's difficult sometimes for a program director to respond individually to each of these. And we have other mechanisms to recruit reviewers. For example, within SAIS, we do send from time to time emails through our mailing lists announcing that we are seeking reviewers for specific programs. So if you are, do not get discouraged if you do not get called up after you send a resume. And also, it's really important to stay up to date. We have lots and lots of mailing lists at NSF, and it's important to subscribe to them and keep an eye on different announcements, because that would be another way to be opportunistic about reviewing.
Okay, the next question is, how do we include international collaborators on a proposal, particularly when there's a subaward?
I can go ahead and take that. Actually, the PAP guide, the proposal award that we just talked about all this time, has a section on eligibility. And we do have a section that talks specifically about foreign organizations. And we tell you that we rarely make direct awards to foreign organizations, but there is a set of procedures in the PAP guide, 1-6, if you're wondering, in the PDF version, that goes through the process of what you do if you want to include a foreign subawardee. And we do have those. It just tells you that there are, you have to check a box on the cover sheet. And you really, if you believe they are essential to the project, you've got to explain in the proposal, in the project description, why local support is not feasible and why the foreign organization can carry out the activity more effectively. There's a bit more guidance in that section, so it is absolutely permissible, but there are additional steps that you have to take to make sure that you justify that. As part of that proposal process, we have program officers review it, reviewers review it, division directors review it. Our Office of International Science and Engineering reviews it. So it is a very, it is a process within NSF. But if it's appropriate for what you're doing, read the instructions in the PAP guide and put that information in your project description and check the box on the cover sheet.
And Jeremy, if I may, I see another question that I think it's related. If you have an international team of scholars, will this generate a problem? I really don't know how to answer if this generates a problem, but I would say that if you are reading the solicitations, you will see that, in fact, NSF encourages international collaboration. What I think it's important to also understand is that we seek to support mostly U.S. researchers, U.S.-based researchers and students, and acknowledge the fact that in fact, we work collaboratively with many other agencies across the world to enable international collaboration. So if you have international partners, I don't see how that is a problem. I think that the question is about financial support for those partners, and that's where Jean's clarification was very.
But one other point to just establish the framework for this is that typically on these, we see the U.S. supporting the U.S. side and the foreign institution getting support from their government to perform their part of the research. That is what is most typical in those international collaborations, which we love and are extremely valuable to the S&T infrastructure.
I have a question on NSF's 2-month policy. And this is asking, it's a 2-month policy, a cap on senior personnel across all NSF awards. And does this apply to personnel who are not faculty, personnel who are primarily research?
If you are listed under senior personnel, you have to, that policy applies to you, applies to all faculty. That's what the section in the PAP guide refers to. So that gets a little, I'm not quite sure what you mean by others, but the bottom line is if you're senior personnel, faculty, you have to, as defined in the PAP guide, which is, your co-PI, your PI, co-PI, and other faculty, those constitute senior personnel, and that is what the policy applies to. And remember, it's 2 months across all NSF-funded grants in any 1 year. However, you can, if you believe you need it, you put it in the budget and you justify it. That's exactly what the PAP guide says. And there are occasions where the program officer concurs. So that is something you need to take in mind if that's something you want to do with NSF.
Okay, the next question is asking about renewals and what is the difference between a renewal and an accomplishment-based renewal?
Sure. Oh, sorry, Jean.
Program. No, go ahead. You go ahead. Take that question.
So a renewal is still a full 15-page proposal, regular proposal that happens to build on work that you've done before. In fact, there's a space where you can tie it to a previous award that you had. So it's sort of continuing. An accomplishment-based renewal, an ABR, is a much shorter proposal. I think it's like 5 pages. And then instead of the bulk of the project description, you attach a series of publications that demonstrate progress in an area. And so you're asking for, based on your accomplishments, please fund me for a continuing amount of time without having to write a full proposal. Now, not every program supports ABRs. So this is a case where it's important to talk to your program director before you submit one, because it doesn't happen in every program. But that's the difference technically between an ABR and a regular renewal.
It's 4
okay.
pages. I don't know.
What's that?
It's 4 pages, but no worries.
Oh, 4 pages. Sorry. I knew it was short.
Don't want anybody writing it down.
When in doubt, visit the PAP guide.
Yeah, PAP guide. Exactly. That's what you just open it up. It's important to understand, though, a renewal, NSF treats as new. Bottom line, it's a de novo review. It's not like we say, oh, this person's been funded before, we're just going to keep funding them. It's a new start, a fresh review.
Okay, the next question is, does NSF have resources for new faculty to help them understand what can be included as broader impacts? Can it include things, for example, that they are doing as a scientist to contribute to their field in general, such as mentoring and diversity, things that they would do without the NSF project, or should it only include the impacts related to the project?
Yeah, so this is going to vary program to program. I'm interested to hear Stefan's response to this. So there's a lot to that question. Sorry if I get off track from it. But so like I'm thinking within Earth Science, right? I'm in the Division of Earth Sciences and Geo. We, in all of our outreach, we sort of try to collect and show good broader impacts activities that are happening within that field. And those are really just examples. So this is another place it's good to talk to your program director. It's good to read the abstracts of projects that have been funded to see the kinds of things that are being supported. It's going to vary by discipline. It's also going to vary by what kind of institution you're at. A primarily undergraduate institution might have very different broader impacts activities than one that is a R1 that's tightly connected to policy decisions in LA or something, right? Like there are very different types of broader impacts depending on the kind of project and what institution you are and what is the norm for your discipline. Stefan, do you have thoughts on this? I'm sure you do.
Right. So I totally agree, Jennifer. There are things, for example, if you're looking at educational activities or outreach activities that, that might be common across programs and divisions, but there are many, many aspects that would be very specific to programs and divisions. So in SCIENCE, in computer information science and engineering, we have usually a conference in spring that is aimed at early investigator, at early career investigators. And it's focused on the career proposals, but in fact, it is beneficial to any early career investigator, in which exactly questions like this are posed. How do you build broader impact activities? I would also point to you that broader impact, when evaluated, is not simply just the activities, but it is also what is the impact of the research itself onto the society and to the community. So you have to remember that it's really a complex question, and we try to tell the reviewers when we are in panel to look at multiple things. So it's not simply that you have to do specific activities, but what is the value of the research itself.
And I would add, I think you said this at the end of this question, Jeremy, but there was a question about like, should you talk about all of your activities or just the ones related to the project? And for me, it's important that those activities are integrated with the project, right? Like we'll have people say, well, I'm at a minority serving institution, that's my broader impact. No, that's not a broader impact. Your broader impact should be, how are you recruiting people at that institution to engage in your science? What are they going to do? And as Stefan said, what's the impact of your science on society? So it should be, it's great to describe what you've done before. In fact, in your results from prior is a great place to do that. And also you want to demonstrate that you have a record of success, but it's really important that, because we are funding a project and we are funding those broader impacts. And so they should be tied to the project that you're proposing.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And this is, why are grad students who are speaking at a conference, why should they be required to be budgeted under direct costs rather than participant support costs? This is an issue that we're running into quite often.
I think it's going to depend actually on what is really going on in that project. Again, participant support is related to a conference or training activity, and you're put there, and associated costs are appropriately identified in the participant support category. There are some times, however, where they are a regular personnel working on the project, and that is where it would be on a regular research project, and that is where it would be appropriate to budget them. That's the basic answer to that question.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank Gene Feldman, Jennifer Wade, and Stefan Robila for participating in this session today. It's been great to have you. I realize we couldn't get to all of your questions, but please do note that many of the questions that you've asked are already been answered in our frequently asked questions documents that we've put into the chat. So please do go there when you have questions. We'll be posting all of these recorded presentations on the conference website, and we'll let you know as soon as those are. Again, thank you for coming, and we hope to see you at a number of our other sessions over the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much. Everyone.